My coworker failed his project, so he accused me of sabotaging him. He didn't know the IT logs would tell the real story. I never thought that doing my job well would turn into the biggest professional crisis of my career, but that's exactly what happened when my coworker decided I was the reason for his failures. My name is Jennifer, I'm 36 years old, and I work as a senior software developer at a medium-sized tech company called DataVision Solutions in Austin, Texas. I've been with the company for almost 7 years, working my way up from a junior developer to leading some of our most important projects. The culture at DataVision had always been collaborative and supportive, or at least I thought it was until everything fell apart. The trouble started when the company hired a new developer named Derek about 10 months ago. He came in with impressive credentials, a computer science degree from a prestigious university, and previous experience at a well-known Silicon Valley startup. During his interview process, he apparently talked a big game about the innovative solutions he'd implemented at his previous company and how he was looking for new challenges. Management was excited to bring him on board, and he was hired at a senior level, making him technically my peer rather than someone I'd be mentoring. From the beginning, Derek had a certain arrogance about him that rubbed me the wrong way. He'd make comments in meetings about how things were done at his previous company, always with the implication that their methods were superior to ours. He'd dismiss suggestions from other team members with a wave of his hand, saying he'd already tried that approach years ago and it hadn't worked. He seemed particularly dismissive of ideas that came from women on the team, though he was careful enough not to say anything overtly sexist that could get him in trouble with HR. I tried to give Derek the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes people come across as arrogant when they're actually just nervous or trying to prove themselves in a new environment. I made an effort to be welcoming, offering to walk him through our codebase and explain some of the architectural decisions we'd made over the years. He accepted my help with what seemed like reluctance, and I got the sense that he viewed needing assistance as a weakness. Our team was working on a major project for one of our biggest clients, a financial services company that needed a complete overhaul of their data management system. The project was complex, involving multiple integrated components, strict security requirements, and tight deadlines. I was the lead developer on the back-end infrastructure, while Derek was assigned to work on the API layer that would connect our system to the client's existing applications. About 3 months into Derek's tenure, problems started emerging with his portion of the project. The APIs he was developing kept failing integration tests. They'd work in isolation but would break when connected to the rest of the system. During code reviews, other team members started pointing out issues with his implementation, inefficient database queries, security vulnerabilities, and failure to follow our established coding standards. Derek didn't take criticism well. When someone pointed out a problem in his code, he'd get defensive and argumentative. He'd insist that his approach was correct and that the problems were actually caused by issues in other parts of the system. More than once, he implied that the back-end infrastructure I'd built was somehow causing his APIs to fail, even though those same infrastructure components were successfully supporting dozens of other services. Our project manager, a patient woman named Susan, tried to mediate these conflicts. She'd remind everyone that we were a team working toward a common goal and that code reviews were meant to be constructive, not personal. But Derek seemed to take every piece of feedback as a personal attack, and the atmosphere in our team meetings became increasingly tense. Things escalated about 2 months ago when we had a major milestone review with the client. We were supposed to demonstrate the core functionality of the system we'd been building. My back-end components worked perfectly, as did the work from most of the other team members. But when it came time to demonstrate Derek's API integrations, nothing worked. The demos failed repeatedly, throwing error messages and timing out. It was embarrassing for the entire team, but especially for Derek. The client representatives were clearly frustrated, and our company's leadership was concerned about whether we could deliver the project on time. After the meeting, Susan pulled Derek aside for what I assumed was a difficult conversation about his performance. I wasn't privy to what was said, but Derek emerged from that meeting looking angry and humiliated. That's when things took a dark turn. A few days after the failed demo, Susan called me into her office. She looked uncomfortable, which immediately put me on edge. She explained that Derek had come to her with serious concerns about my conduct. According to Derek, I had been deliberately sabotaging his work because I felt threatened by his skills and experience. He claimed that I had been making unauthorized changes to shared code repositories that broke his implementations, that I'd been withholding information he needed to do his job, and that I'd been undermining him in meetings and code reviews. I was stunned. I asked Susan if she seriously believed these accusations, and she said she didn't know what to believe but that she had to investigate any claims of sabotage or professional misconduct. She said that Derek had been quite detailed in his accusations, providing specific dates and times when he claimed I'd interfered with his work. She asked me to provide my side of the story. I explained that I had never sabotaged anyone's work in my entire career. Every change I made to the codebase was properly documented in our version control system with clear commit messages explaining what I'd changed and why. I'd never withheld information from Derek or anyone else. In fact, I'd gone out of my way to help him when he first started, even though he'd seemed reluctant to accept that help. As for undermining him in meetings, I'd simply been doing my job by pointing out legitimate technical issues during code reviews, the same way I did with everyone's code including my own. Susan said she appreciated my response but that she'd need to conduct a thorough investigation. In the meantime, she was temporarily reassigning some of my responsibilities to avoid any appearance of impropriety. I left her office feeling sick to my stomach. In 7 years at this company, I'd never had a complaint filed against me. I'd received consistently excellent performance reviews. I'd been trusted with the most critical projects. And now I was being investigated for sabotage based on the accusations of someone whose own work was failing. Over the next few days, the investigation proceeded. Susan interviewed other team members, asking them if they'd observed any inappropriate behavior from me toward Derek. As far as I know, everyone vouched for my professionalism and collaborative approach. Some people even mentioned that they'd noticed Derek being defensive and difficult to work with, though they were careful not to turn the investigation into an attack on him. Derek, meanwhile, seemed energized by having filed his complaint. He started documenting everything in emails, sending messages to Susan and even to upper management about various incidents where he claimed I was being obstructive or hostile. He'd copy multiple people on these emails, ensuring that his version of events was widely distributed. I felt like I was under constant surveillance, with every interaction being twisted and reinterpreted as evidence of malicious intent. The worst part was the uncertainty. I didn't know what specific evidence Derek had provided or exactly what he was claiming I'd done. I just knew that my professional reputation was under attack and that even if I was ultimately cleared, the accusation alone might permanently damage how people viewed me. Then something interesting happened. Our IT department got involved. DataVision, like most tech companies, maintained comprehensive logs of all system access and activity. Every login, every file access, every code commit, every database query, everything was logged and retained for security and compliance purposes. Our IT director, a thorough and methodical man named Paul, decided that the best way to investigate Derek's claims was to examine the actual digital evidence. Paul requested permission from upper management to conduct a detailed review of the IT logs covering the time period of Derek's accusations. He explained that if I had actually been sabotaging Derek's work through unauthorized code changes or system access, there would be clear digital footprints showing exactly what I'd done and when. Management agreed, and Paul began his investigation. I was nervous about this development even though I knew I'd done nothing wrong. IT logs can be complex and sometimes things that look suspicious in isolation have perfectly innocent explanations when you understand the context. I worried that something I'd done legitimately might be misinterpreted as evidence against me. Paul worked on his analysis for about a week, examining thousands of log entries and correlating them with Derek's specific accusations. He looked at every code commit, every file access, every system login during the relevant time periods. He reconstructed timelines of activity and cross-referenced them with Derek's claims about when sabotage had supposedly occurred. Finally, Susan called me into a meeting with Paul and our department head, a senior executive named Richard. The atmosphere in the room was serious but not hostile, which I took as a potentially good sign. Paul had his laptop open with several spreadsheets and log files displayed. He explained that he'd completed his investigation and had some findings to share. Paul started by addressing Derek's claim that I'd made unauthorized changes to shared code repositories that broke his implementations. He showed the logs from our version control system, which tracked every single code change made by every developer, complete with timestamps, change descriptions, and approval records. He explained that every change I'd made to shared code had been properly documented, had gone through the required code review process, and had been approved by the appropriate people before being merged. More importantly, Paul showed that the changes Derek claimed had broken his code had actually been made either before Derek even started working on those particular features or had been made to completely different parts of the system that his code didn't interact with. In several cases, the timestamps proved that I couldn't possibly have broken his code because I'd made my changes hours or even days before he'd even created the files he claimed were affected. Paul then addressed the claim that I'd been accessing Derek's files or systems inappropriately. The access logs showed that I had only accessed files and systems that were part of my legitimate work responsibilities. There was no evidence of me accessing Derek's personal directories, his development environment, or any resources that weren't part of my normal job duties. In fact, Derek had accessed my directories far more frequently than I'd ever accessed anything of his. This revelation hung in the air for a moment. Richard asked Paul to clarify what he meant. Paul pulled up another set of logs showing that Derek had repeatedly accessed my code files, my design documents, and my development databases at odd hours, often late at night or early in the morning. Some of these accesses corresponded with times when Derek had later claimed to have discovered problems with my work. Paul went further. He showed that Derek had accessed the company's HR system multiple times, apparently looking up information about me, my employment history, and my performance reviews. He'd also accessed files belonging to other team members who'd given him critical feedback during code reviews. The pattern suggested that Derek was the one engaging in inappropriate system access, not me. Finally, Paul addressed the timeline of Derek's own work. The logs showed that Derek had frequently missed deadlines, had submitted code that failed automated testing, and had made numerous emergency fixes to his own code at the last minute, often right before important demos or reviews. The failed client demo, for instance, had been entirely due to bugs in Derek's code that had nothing to do with any other part of the system. Richard listened to all of this with an increasingly stern expression. He asked Paul directly if there was any evidence whatsoever that I had sabotaged Derek's work or engaged in any professional misconduct. Paul said unequivocally that there was no such evidence, and that in fact the evidence suggested Derek's accusations were false and possibly an attempt to deflect attention from his own performance issues. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but it was mixed with anger. Derek had put me through weeks of stress and professional uncertainty, had tried to destroy my reputation, and had done it all based on complete lies. Richard thanked Paul for his thorough investigation and asked me if I had anything to add. I said that I appreciated the company taking the time to look at the actual evidence rather than just taking accusations at face value, and that I hoped we could now move forward and focus on delivering the project for our client. Richard said that there would indeed be consequences, but not for me. He said that Derek would be placed on immediate administrative leave pending a disciplinary review. He apologized to me for the stress I'd been subjected to and assured me that my reputation within the company remained excellent. He said that Susan would be reaching out to team members to clarify that the investigation had found no wrongdoing on my part. After the meeting, I returned to my desk feeling vindicated but also emotionally drained. Word spread quickly through the office that Derek had been placed on leave, and several coworkers came by to express their support. Some admitted that they'd never believed Derek's accusations but hadn't felt comfortable saying so during the investigation. Others said they'd been suspicious of Derek's complaints because they'd noticed his pattern of blaming others for his own mistakes. Susan called a team meeting a few days later to address the situation. Without going into specific details about Derek's accusations or the investigation, she explained that there had been some interpersonal conflicts on the team, that those conflicts had been investigated thoroughly, and that the team could now move forward with confidence. She also announced that Derek would not be returning to the team and that his responsibilities were being redistributed among the rest of us. I later learned through the office grapevine that Derek had been given the option to resign rather than be fired. The company wanted to avoid the potential legal complications of a termination, and Derek apparently took the resignation option. He cleared out his desk one evening after most people had gone home, and that was the last we saw of him. With Derek gone, the atmosphere on our team improved dramatically. The remaining work on the client project was redistributed, and without the constant drama and conflict, we actually made faster progress. I ended up taking over some of Derek's unfinished API work and discovered that it was even worse than I'd realized. His code was poorly structured, inadequately tested, and in some cases didn't even attempt to meet the requirements. It was clear that he'd been in over his head from the beginning and had lashed out rather than admit he needed help. We delivered the project to the client about a month later than originally scheduled, but given all the complications, that was actually pretty good. The client was satisfied with the final product, and the delay was attributed to scope changes rather than any internal drama. My role in salvaging Derek's work was recognized by management, and I received both a bonus and a formal commendation in my personnel file. The whole experience taught me several important lessons about workplace dynamics and the value of documentation. If our company hadn't maintained comprehensive IT logs, Derek's accusations might have been much harder to disprove. It would have been his word against mine, with no objective way to determine the truth. The digital evidence saved my career and my reputation. I also learned that some people, when faced with their own inadequacy, will try to tear down others rather than improve themselves. Derek could have asked for help, could have admitted he was struggling, could have worked collaboratively with the team to solve problems. Instead, he chose to create a false narrative where his failures were someone else's fault. It was a cowardly approach that ultimately backfired on him. The incident also made me more aware of the importance of protecting yourself professionally. I'd always been diligent about documenting my work in commit messages and emails, but I became even more careful after this experience. I made sure that every significant decision or change was documented in writing with clear rationale. I was more conscious about maintaining professional boundaries and ensuring that all my interactions could withstand scrutiny. Several months after Derek's departure, I heard through a mutual connection that he'd landed another job at a different tech company. I felt a moment of concern for his new coworkers, wondering if he'd learned anything from what happened at Datavision or if he'd simply moved on to repeat the same patterns elsewhere. But ultimately, it wasn't my problem anymore. My career at Datavision continued to flourish. About 6 months after the incident, I was promoted to a lead architect position, overseeing technical strategy for multiple projects. The promotion came with a significant raise and even more responsibility, and I like to think it was partly the company's way of demonstrating their confidence in me after the false accusations. I've told this story to other professionals in the tech industry, and many have shared similar experiences of being falsely accused or blamed for others' failures. It seems to be an unfortunate pattern in competitive environments where some people try to get ahead by pushing others down. The common thread in the stories with positive outcomes is always the same: thorough documentation and objective evidence matter more than accusations or politics. If I could give advice to anyone facing a similar situation, it would be this: stay calm, cooperate fully with any investigation, and trust that the truth will emerge if people are willing to look at the evidence. Don't let false accusations cause you to panic or act defensively in ways that might actually make you look guilty. Document everything you do professionally, not because you expect to be accused of wrongdoing, but because good documentation is just good practice. Also, recognize that not everyone who seems confident and competent actually is. Derek came in with impressive credentials and talked a good game, but when it came to actually delivering quality work, he couldn't back up his own hype. Some people are very good at self-promotion and very bad at self-awareness. Don't be intimidated by that kind of bluster, and don't assume that someone's past achievements or prestigious background mean they're beyond making mistakes or behaving unethically. Looking back now, almost a year after the whole ordeal, I can see it as a defining moment in my career. It tested my professionalism, my resilience, and my faith in institutional processes. It could have ended very differently if the company hadn't taken the investigation seriously or if we hadn't had the IT infrastructure to provide objective evidence. I'm grateful that justice prevailed, but I'm also more realistic about the fact that it doesn't always work out that way. The experience made me a better colleague and mentor. When I work with junior developers now, I emphasize the importance of asking for help when you need it, of admitting mistakes rather than covering them up, and of treating code reviews as learning opportunities rather than personal attacks. I try to create an environment where people feel safe being honest about their struggles, because I saw firsthand what happens when someone feels they have to pretend to know everything and blame others when that pretense falls apart. I also became more involved in our company's processes around investigations and conflict resolution. I worked with HR to develop better protocols for handling accusations of professional misconduct, emphasizing the importance of gathering objective evidence before making judgments. The goal was to ensure that future employees facing false accusations would have the same protection I'd received. Derek's accusation that I'd sabotaged him was meant to destroy my career and save his own. He didn't expect that the IT logs would exist, or at least didn't understand how comprehensive they were. He probably thought it would be his word against mine, and that by being loud and accusatory enough, he could make people doubt me. But in the end, the digital evidence told the real story, and that story was very different from the one he tried to construct. The truth mattered, the evidence mattered, and I'm still here while Derek is gone. That's not vindictiveness, it's just the natural consequence of integrity versus deception. And every time I commit code to our repository with a clear, detailed message explaining what I've changed and why, I remember that good documentation isn't just about helping your future self or your teammates. Sometimes it's about protecting yourself from those who would rather destroy you than face their own failings.